You stand across the street from the building you built with your own two hands, and nobody recognizes you anymore. The wind cuts through your coat, the same gray wool coat you've worn for 11 years, thinner now at the elbows, missing a button you never got around to replacing. You watch the revolving doors spin, watch young men and women in crisp suits pour out for their lunch break, phones pressed to their ears, laughing at things you'll never be part of again. 43 floors of steel and glass rise above you, glinting gold in the November sun. Thorn Industries. Your name isn't on it anymore, hasn't been for 3 years. But the foundation, 6 feet beneath that lobby floor, you poured that yourself. Back before it was even a company. Back when it was just you, a used pickup truck, and a promise you made to a woman who isn't here to see any of this. Your name is Gideon Ashworth Kestler, and you used to own that building. You're 71 years old now, and you've come back here every Tuesday for the past 4 months. Though you couldn't fully explain why if someone asked. Maybe it's the coffee cart on the corner. The one that still makes it the way you like, too strong, no sugar splash of cream. Maybe it's just habit. A body that spent 40 years walking this same stretch of sidewalk and doesn't know how to stop. Maybe it's grief wearing the shape of routine. Whatever it is, you come. You sit on the same low concrete wall by the fountain, and you watch the life you built continue on without you. Like a river that doesn't notice the stone that used to sit in its bed. If this story is starting to sit heavy in your chest already, that's exactly where it needs to be. Because what happens next is going to test everything you think you know about dignity, about being forgotten, and about what it means to finally be seen. Stay with this one until the end. Because the ending is going to break you open in the best possible way. And if stories like this move you, stories about people who were overlooked, dismissed, underestimated, and then finally recognized for who they really are, consider subscribing. This channel exists for exactly these moments. And there's nothing that keeps these stories alive like a viewer who decides to stay. Your coat is old. You know that. What you don't fully register, sitting there in the cold with your hands wrapped around a paper cup, is how you look to someone walking past who doesn't know your history. Your beard has gone unshaven for 4 days, not from neglect, but from the particular exhaustion of a man who lives alone and sometimes forgets that mirrors exist. Your shoes are good leather but scuffed. Your hands are cracked from the cold because you stopped carrying gloves after Margaret died. She was always the one who reminded you to bring them. You don't know that a new security guard started at the building 2 weeks ago. His name is Roscoe Vantrell Higgs, 26 years old, ex-military, still adjusting to a job that mostly involves standing very still and watching very little happen. Roscoe has a checklist in his head, trained into him during onboarding, loitering, especially near the entrance, especially from individuals who appear to be experiencing homelessness, should be reported to building management within 15 minutes if the individual doesn't move along. You've been sitting on that wall for almost 40 minutes today, just watching, just remembering. You have nowhere urgent to be, which is its own kind of quiet tragedy for a man who once ran board meetings that decided the fates of 12,000 employees. Roscoe walks over. He's not unkind. You'll want to remember that later, because it matters. He crouches slightly, the way people do when they're trying not to loom over someone they've already decided is fragile or dangerous, sometimes both at once. "Sir," he says, "I need you to move along. You can't loiter here." You look up at him, and for a moment you don't even understand what he's saying. Because no one has spoken to you like that. Like you're a problem to be managed in over 40 years. Not since you were 29 and sleeping in your truck in a Walmart parking lot, teaching yourself accounting from library books because you couldn't afford night school anymore. "I'm just sitting," you say. Your voice comes out quieter than you intend. Age does that. It softens things you don't mean to soften. "I understand, sir, but this is private property, and we've had some issues with people setting up here. I'm going to need you to move along, or I'll have to call it in." Call it in. The phrase lands strange in your chest. A bruise you didn't know was there until someone pressed on it. You want to laugh, except it isn't funny, not really. You want to tell him, "Son, I signed the deed for this land. I stood on this exact spot before there was a fountain, before there was marble, when it was just cracked asphalt and a dream that everyone told me was too big for a man with your background." But the words don't come. Something in you, some old, tired, grief-worn part of you, just goes quiet instead. "I wasn't doing anything wrong," you say, standing slowly. your knees protesting the cold the way they have for the last decade. I hear you, sir, I do. But I've got a job to do. You nod. You understand jobs. You understand rules, protocols. Liability. You wrote entire manuals of protocols once, back when your signature meant something inside those walls. So you don't argue. You just start walking, coffee cup still warm in your hand. And you feel something in your chest cave in, quiet and total, like a floor giving way beneath a house no one lives in anymore. You don't go far. You never do. You cross the street and sit at the bus stop bench, because your legs are tired and your heart is tireder, and you watch the building you built rise up into the sky like it's laughing at you. Though buildings don't laugh, they just stand there, indifferent to the men who made them. This is the part of the story where things usually get worse before they get better. And this one is no exception, because 10 minutes later, a woman named Delphine Okonkwo Reyes walks out of the building's front doors for her lunch break, adjusting her scarf against the cold, scrolling through her phone, half distracted the way people are on their 15th Tuesday of the same routine. She's the newest member of the executive assistant pool on the 38th floor, hired 8 months ago, and she has never once, in her time there, heard your name spoken aloud in casual conversation. To her, and to almost everyone currently working in that building, Gideon Ashworth Kestler is a name on old plaques. If it's mentioned at all, a founder from before, the way people talk about founders once the company has grown large enough to forget the hands that built it. She glances toward the bus stop out of habit, the way you glance at anything near you while waiting to cross the street, and she sees an older man sitting alone, coat thin, beard unshaven, hands wrapped around a coffee cup like it's the only warm thing in his world. And because she is, underneath the distraction and the busy schedule, a genuinely kind person, something in her slows down. She doesn't call security. She doesn't call anyone. She just walks over. Sir, are you okay? Do you need anything? Food or? You look up, startled, because kindness has become rare enough in your life now that it catches you off guard, like sunlight through clouds you'd stopped expecting to part. I'm all right, you say, just resting. She studies you for a moment. The particular way some people study strangers when they sense there's more beneath the surface than what's visible. You're out here a lot, she says. I've seen you before. By the fountain. I used to work near here, you say. It's not a lie. It's just so much smaller than the truth that it might as well be one. She nods, unbothered, unhurried, despite her lunch break ticking away. What did you do? And here is where you almost don't answer. Here is where 40 years of quiet dignity, of not needing anyone to validate what you built, almost keeps your mouth shut. But something about her face, she reminds you a little of Margaret. The way she doesn't rush you, the way she waits like your answer matters, loosens something in your chest. I started a company, you say. A long time ago now. Oh yeah? What company? You almost don't say it. You almost let the moment pass. The way you've let so many moments pass in the last 3 years, disappearing quietly into the background of a life you no longer recognize as your own. But you look up at the building, 43, floors of glass holding your entire life's work, and when something in you decides that today, just this once, the truth deserves to be spoken out loud. Thorn Industries, you say. I founded it in 1987. Delphine's expression doesn't change right away. It takes a second, the way information sometimes needs a moment to travel from ears to understanding. And then it does change, slowly, her eyebrows lifting, her mouth parting slightly. Wait, she says. You're Gideon Kestler? I was, you say, and there's something devastating in that past tense. Something that tells her more about the last 3 years of your life than any explanation could. She doesn't say anything for a moment. Then, the security guard, he tried to move you along, didn't he? I saw it happen from the window. You don't answer. You don't need to. Your silence is answer enough. And this is where you need to understand something about Delphine Okonkwo Reyes. She is not someone with power in that building. She's an executive assistant. 29 years old, 3 years into her career, still learning the org chart, but she has something more valuable than a title. In this moment, she has the presence of mind to know that this cannot simply pass by unaddressed, and the courage, standing there in the cold, to do something about it. Please, she says. Please wait right here. Just 2 minutes. I need to make a call. You want to tell her not to bother, that you didn't come here for a fuss, that you've made your peace, mostly with being invisible now, that grief and time have a way of shrinking A man down until he takes up less space in the world than he used to. And that's all right. That's just how it goes. But something in her urgency stops you. And so you sit and you wait. And the cold doesn't feel quite as sharp as it did 5 minutes ago. Delphine walks 15 feet away and pulls out her phone. She doesn't call security. She calls someone else entirely, a man named Thaddeus Okonkwo Reyes. Though the shared last name isn't coincidence, he's her uncle. And he happens to be the current chief operating officer of Thorn Industries, a man who started in the mailroom 31 years ago and was personally promoted through the ranks by you, back when you still walked those halls every single day, back when you knew every employee's name and most of their children's names too. "Uncle Thad," she says, voice low and urgent. "You need to come outside right now. It's about Mr. Kestler." There's a pause on the line, and then his voice sharp with sudden alertness. "Gideon, he's here?" "He's sitting outside. Security tried to move him along. They thought he was homeless." "Uncle Thad," he didn't even correct them. Silence, heavy and stunned, and then, "I'm coming down. Don't let him leave." 6 minutes later, the revolving doors spin, and a man in a charcoal suit walks out fast enough that his coat flares behind him, moving with a purpose that draws the attention of everyone near the entrance, including a very confused Roscoe Higgs, who has just returned from his 15-minute break and has no idea what's about to happen. Thaddeus Okonkwo Reyes crosses the plaza in long strides, and when he sees you sitting there on that bus stop bench, something breaks across his face. Not shock exactly, but something closer to grief mixed with disbelief, mixed with a kind of desperate relief, the look of a man seeing someone he thought he'd lost for good. "Gideon," he says, and his voice cracks slightly on your name. "My God, Gideon." You look up, and recognition floods through you too, though it takes your tired mind a second to place the face of a boy you once caught, sneaking extra donuts. From the break room in 1994, now a grown man in an expensive suit, running a company you built. "Thaddeus," you say, and you can't help the small smile that breaks through despite everything. "Look at you." He doesn't say anything else. He just pulls you into a hug, right there on the sidewalk in front of everyone. And you feel something in your chest that's been frozen for 3 years start to crack, slow and painful, like ice giving way to spring. This is the turning point, the moment everything begins to shift. But understand, it doesn't fix things instantly, and it shouldn't, because dignity restored too quickly doesn't feel earned. What happens next is slower, quieter, and somehow more powerful than a simple reversal of fortune. Thaddeus pulls back and looks at you properly. Really looks, and you watch him take in the thin coat, the unshaven face, the cracked hands, and something furious and protective moves behind his eyes. "Roscoe!" he calls out, and the young guard, still standing near the entrance with a growing sense of dread, straightens immediately. "Come here." Roscoe approaches, uncertain, glancing between you and Thaddeus, clearly beginning to understand that something has gone very wrong, though he doesn't yet know exactly what. "Do you know who this is?" Thaddeus asks, not unkindly, but with a weight that makes Roscoe stand a little straighter. "No, sir," Roscoe says. "This is Gideon Kestler. He founded this company in 1987 out of a truck, with less money than you probably have in your bank account right now. Every single person who works in that building, including me, has a job because of decisions he made 30 years ago. He built this." Roscoe's face goes through several stages of realization, landing finally on something close to horror. "Sir," he says, turning to you, "I am so sorry. I had no idea. I was just, the training said." "You did your job," you say, and you mean it. Because you understand protocols. You understand a young man following the rules he was given, and you refuse to let this become a moment of blame against someone who was simply doing what he was trained to do. You weren't wrong to ask questions. You were wrong about who I was, that's all. That's not a crime, son. That's just circumstance. Your generosity toward him, even now, even after everything, seems to unsettle Roscoe more than anger would have. He nods, throat working, and steps back, unsure what else to say. Thaddeus turns back to you. His hand rests firmly on your shoulder, as if he's afraid that if he lets go, you might disappear again, the way you seem to have disappeared for the last 3 years. "Gideon," he says, quieter now, "why didn't you tell anyone you were struggling? Why didn't you call? Any of us, the board, the old team, me, we would have." "Would have what?" you say. And there's no bitterness in it, just a tired honesty that's been building in you for years. "Would have given me a job I don't need. Would have written a check." Thaddeus, it was never about the money. I have the money. That's not what I lost. He waits, understanding somehow that this needs to come out slowly, in its own time. I lost Margaret, you say, and saying her name out loud here, in front of the building she used to bring you lunch to every Wednesday for 15 years, nearly undoes you completely. 3 years ago. And after she went, I stopped knowing how to be around people who wanted something from me, or expected something from me, or looked at me like I was still supposed to be somebody. I didn't want to be Gideon Kestler, founder, anymore. I just wanted to sit somewhere quiet and remember her. This building, this fountain, this is where I proposed to her, Thaddeus. 41 years ago, before any of this existed. I come here because it's the only place that still feels like she's close. The plaza has gone quiet around you. Employees slowing their steps, sensing without fully understanding that something significant is unfolding. Thaddeus's eyes have gone wet, and he doesn't try to hide it. I didn't know that, he says softly. Nobody did, you say. I never told anyone. It wasn't for telling. It was just mine. He sits down beside you on the cold bench. This powerful man in his expensive suit, sitting on public concrete beside the coat he once wore, is now thin and worn. And for a long moment, neither of you says anything at all. Then he says, come inside, please, just for a little while. Let people see you. Let them know you're all right. You hesitate, old instincts of privacy and pride pulling at you, but something in his voice, something almost pleading, makes you nod. What happens over the next hour is the part of this story that will stay with you for the rest of your life, and it needs to be told slowly, because it deserves that. You walk through the revolving doors of Thorne Industries for the first time in 3 years, and the lobby, the same lobby you designed the marble flooring for personally, back when you cared about things like the acoustics of footsteps, feels both utterly familiar and entirely foreign. Employees stop walking. Phones lower. A ripple moves through the space. Whispers passing person to person. That's him. That's the founder. That's Gideon Kestler. And by the time you reach the elevator bank, a small crowd has gathered, unsure whether to approach, watching you with something between reverence and disbelief. An older woman near the security desk. You recognize her? Barely, Yvain Marchetti Bosch, who has worked reception since 1996 and comes around the desk with tears already falling. And she takes both your hands in hers. Mr. Kestler, she says, we wondered what happened to you. We used to talk about you, you know, in the break room, wondering if you were all right. You didn't know that. You didn't know that after everything. After fading yourself out of a life you built, there were still people inside these walls who thought of you, who wondered, who cared. The elevator ride to the top floor is quiet, but it's not an uncomfortable quiet, and it's the kind that settles over people after something enormous has shifted. When the doors open onto the executive floor, more faces turn toward you, and Thaddeus, without asking, without needing to ask, guides you toward what used to be your office. It hasn't been converted into anything else. It's still there, mostly untouched. A small shrine of sorts that the company never quite had the heart to repurpose. Your desk is still there. Your chair. A photograph of you and Margaret from 1989, taken on the day you moved into this office for the first time. Both of you younger and laughing and utterly unaware of everything that was still to come, the successes, the growth, the loss. You stand in the doorway for a long moment, and you feel Thaddeus's hand steady on your shoulder again. We never touched it, he says. Nobody could bring themselves to. It felt like it was still yours. Because it is. You walk inside slowly, running your fingers along the edge of the desk, and something in your chest, something that's been clenched tight for 3 years, finally begins to loosen. This is the moment the story turns fully toward its resolution. And what happens over the following weeks matters just as much as this single afternoon, because dignity restored in a single conversation means little if it isn't followed by something lasting. Thaddeus insists, gently but firmly, that you allow the company to help you, not with money, because you've never needed that, but with connection. He sets up a standing lunch every single Tuesday in the executive dining room, so that the day you already spend near the building becomes a day you spend inside it, surrounded by people instead of sitting alone at a bus stop bench. Slowly, over the following weeks, you begin attending. Slowly, you begin talking to people, not as the intimidating founder from the old plaques, but as a man who has lived and lost and is still learning how to keep living. Delphine becomes something like a friend to you, checking in some days just to see how you're doing. And you learn that she lost her own father 2 years before she ever met you, which is part of why she stopped that day at the bus stop instead of walking past like everyone else did. You learn that kindness, real kindness, often comes from people who've been through their own version of your pain and recognized it in you before you even said a word. Roscoe, the young security guard, comes to you personally 3 days later, off the clock, in his own clothes instead of his uniform, and apologizes again, more fully this time, and you tell him something you mean with your whole heart, that the world needs more young men who follow their training carefully and speak to strangers with respect, even when they're wrong about who those strangers are. You tell him the mistake was never his to carry. You tell him you're not angry, you're grateful. Actually, because if he hadn't approached you that day, none of this would have happened. Sometimes the hardest moments crack us open just enough to let something better in. The board, when they learn the full story, quietly establishes something they name the Kestler Bench Initiative, a modest program that trains security and building staff across all their properties to approach unhoused or struggling individuals with dignity and resources instead of dismissal, connecting people to shelters, meals, and services rather than simply moving them along. It isn't about publicity. You insist it never carries your name publicly, though internally, everyone knows exactly where the idea came from. It matters to you deeply that the worst afternoon of your recent life becomes the reason other people with far less than you had, people who really are struggling, who really do need somewhere warm, are treated with more compassion than you were shown that Tuesday. Margaret's fountain, the one outside, the one where you proposed 41 years ago and that gets a small plaque installed. A month later, without much fanfare, just a quiet bronze marker that reads simply, "For Margaret, who believed in me before anyone else did, and for anyone who ever sat here needing to be seen." You still visit every Tuesday. But now, instead of sitting alone in a thin coat with a paper coffee cup slowly going, cold in your cracked hands, you walk through the front doors, where the new security guard, Roscoe, who asked to stay on despite everything, who you personally requested remain, greets you by name, and holds the door and asks how your week has been. You take the elevator to the top floor. You have lunch with people who remember you, and people who are only now getting to know you, and it turns out that both kinds of connection can hold real warmth. You are 71 years old, and for 3 years, you let yourself believe you had become invisible, that the life you built had moved on so completely, without you, that you no longer belonged inside it. But sitting there on that cold bench that Tuesday, a stranger who owed you nothing decided to stop, decided to ask if you were all right, decided that your dignity was worth 2 minutes of her lunch break, and that single choice unraveled 3 years of quiet disappearing. You've learned something in these past weeks that you wished you'd understood sooner, that being forgotten and being invisible are not the same thing. You were never invisible. You had simply stopped letting yourself be seen, and the moment you allowed one person to truly look at you, everything else slowly began finding its way back. You don't have to have your name on a building to matter. You just have to let someone see you long enough to remember that you always did.